Good Tuesday morning, and thanks for joining us here on KARE 11 News Now. I'm Alicia Lewis. Happening as we speak, you gotta bundle up if you're gonna go anywhere today. Dangerously cold temperatures, some of them double digits below zero, are settling in across the state of Minnesota. Some of us could even see a few flakes today. We're gonna be checking in with our weather team in just a little bit. Meanwhile, we are following breaking news from overnight out of St. Paul. This is video from a house fire on Sydney Street East, just off of Oakdale Avenue. It happened at around 1 o'clock this morning. The fire chief spoke with our photographer, telling us 4 adults and 1 child have been displaced. 1 adult was brought to the hospital as a precaution. The cause is still under investigation. We asked about fighting fires in these bitter cold temperatures, and the chief told us it's something that the crews train for. No firefighters were injured. Happening today, we're expecting new insight into Operation Metro Surge from the head of ICE operations. This comes after weeks of federal agents in our communities. Our Audrey Russo is at the live desk with more.
Yeah, we know who will be speaking at this 2 p.m. press conference. Border Patrol Commander at Large Greg Bavino and ICE's Associate Director of Enforcement and Removal Operations, Marcos Charles. What we really don't know is the what. Just that it's going to be an update on immigration operations here in the Twin Cities. Now, in the meantime, we're getting more information on the conditions those arrested by ICE are facing in the Whipple building. We spoke to a veteran who you see here getting tackled in video by federal agents while observing their operations. William Verme says he repeatedly asked for a phone call, but never got one in the 8 hours he was detained. Now, Verme's lawyer tells us he waited hours to speak with his client and was eventually told he couldn't because Verme didn't ask for his attorney by name.
I have represented people accused of the most horrific crimes, and I have never encountered the type of stonewalling, deliberate stonewalling and delay that I experienced in trying to see Will.
Now, in the last 24 hours, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem posted on X about the number of people who've been arrested in Minneapolis. First, she said 10,000, quote, criminal illegal aliens have been taken into custody in Minneapolis. But later in the post, she said 3,000 have been detained over the last 6 weeks. Back to you.
Audrey, thank you. An update now on the lawsuit to halt ICE operations in the state. The federal government has responded, calling claims frivolous. Last week, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison called the operation a federal invasion and said it must stop. Minnesota now has until tomorrow to respond before a temporary restraining order could be filed. Now, the feds are also appealing a ruling involving protesters. Our Megan McPherson joins us in the newsroom with details.
In that court order, the judge ruled that ICE can no longer use chemical irritants on protesters that are not breaking the law and said they cannot arrest protesters who are following them as long as they are keeping a safe distance. Now, attorneys for the Department of Justice have filed a notice to appeal that decision. This essentially signals their intent to challenge the judge's decision, and we'll be waiting to see when their official appeal is filed. U.S. District Judge Kate Menendez's initial ruling pertained to a case filed by 6 Minnesota activists, this was from back in December, who say ICE and Border Patrol officers violated their constitutional rights while enforcing the Trump administration's immigration crackdown in the Twin Cities. The Department of Homeland Security has continually pushed back, saying federal officers are acting lawfully and face assaults, vandalism, and interference while doing their jobs. And in a previously issued statement, DHS Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin also told us her agency is taking appropriate and constitutional measures to uphold the law and protect federal officers along with the public from what she called dangerous rioters.
This morning, the St. Paul Police Department says it's investigating Sunday's protests that interrupted a church service as disorderly conduct. This is new video of the incident inside City's church. Demonstrators shouted "ICE out" as well as "Renee Good." Their investigation comes as after the White House said that the Justice Department is investigating. The protesters claim the church's pastor works for ICE. Homeland Security says it will not comment on whether that is true. Well, in just a few hours, students at the U of M are heading back to school for the spring semester. But with ICE operations underway across the state, the Twin Cities campus is offering virtual learning options. This decision falls in line with how many other school districts in the area are responding to ICE. And that's why students, parents, educators, and community leaders are gathering in about a few hours from now to speak on the impact this is having on kids in schools. They're going to meet at the state capitol at 10 o'clock this morning. We have new details this morning about the investigation into the death of Renee Good. Both CNN and the Washington Post say the FBI briefly opened a civil rights investigation into Jonathan Ross, the ICE agent who shot and killed Good nearly 2 weeks ago. That is in contrast to what the Deputy Attorney General for the DOJ said over the weekend. Appearing on Fox News Sunday, Deputy AG Todd Blanche said that the shooting of Good does not warrant a federal investigation.
The Department of Justice doesn't just stand up and investigate because some congressman thinks we should, because some governor thinks that we should. We investigate when it's appropriate to investigate. And that is not the case here. It wasn't the case when it happened, and it's not the case today.
The FBI declined to comment to KARE 11 about the investigation. We've reached out to the Department of Justice, and we're waiting to hear back. Other news stories this morning, a shocking recount now from Senator John Hoffman about the morning he was shot at his home in a politically motivated attack. John and his wife Yvette survived the shooting. An hour later, the same man shot and killed Melissa and Mark Hortman. Senator Hoffman is 7 months into his recovery after being shot 9 times in his home in the early morning hours of June 14th. Investigators say a 57-year-old man targeted Democratic lawmakers as he impersonated a police officer at the Hoffman's door and at the home of Melissa and Mark Hortman. Hoffman described the moments the shooting started.
He finally, after he was pointing the gun to my daughter, I looked and I could see the mask and I said, "You're not a cop." And I slammed the door on him. First bullet, then he started shooting, and all I heard was pop, 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 pop. And then time slowed down, Jana. One bullet I saw come through the door actually hit me here. This one was 2 millimeters from my heart. Then this one was also close. This one's still inside me, but this one went down and out my flank. I'm looking in disbelief, like, what's going on?
Now, as for the man charged in the shootings, Vance Belter, he's due in court for a status conference hearing on February 20th. There's no fixed trial date, and at last report, the federal government is still deciding whether to seek the death penalty. Belter has pleaded not guilty. Right now, President Trump is upping the ante in his bid to take over Greenland. He told Norway's leader that since he lost out on the Nobel Peace Prize, he doesn't feel obligated to think only of peace and can now think about what is good and proper for the United States. NBC's Alice Barr has more from Washington.
Hi there. In a flurry of activity overnight, President Trump posted private messages with European allies and vowed there was no going back in his quest to take control of Greenland, while he did say he would meet with various parties on the sidelines of an economic forum he's headed to today in Switzerland. President Trump overnight leaving the National Football Championship in Florida and looking ahead to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland.
It's going to be a very interesting Davos,
where he'll come face to face with many of the European leaders antagonized by his intensifying push to take control of Greenland and tariff threats against 8 countries and close allies standing in his way.
I don't think they're going to push back too much. Look, we have to have it. They have to have this done. They can't protect it.
The president responding to a revelation from Norway's prime minister, who says he reached out about Greenland and that President Trump replied in part, quote, "Considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace." The Norwegian leader pointing out the Nobel Committee selects the prize winners, not Norway's government. President Trump rejecting that.
If anybody thinks that Norway doesn't control the Nobel Prize, they're just kidding.
While adding that he doesn't care about the prize. That as President Trump declined to answer when NBC News asked if he would take Greenland by force. Close Republican allies downplayed that idea.
I don't foresee military intervention in Greenland. It's a small population of people, and I think diplomatic channels is the way to go.
The president maintains the U.S. needs to own Greenland to guard against what he sees as threats from Russia and China to take it over, all amid the growing risk of a fresh trade war with close allies. European leaders holding an emergency summit this week deciding how to respond to the new U.S. tariffs could consider what's known as the trade bazooka. It's never been used and would allow EU members to impose broad retaliatory measures, though many are calling to de-escalate. In Washington, Alice Barr, NBC News.
Be sure to stick with us. More news and weather coming up after the break.